Hey everybody, what is going on? This is episode 82 of VR Roundtable, and it's me, Anthony. I'm joined by Gary, but we have two special guests that are joining us this week. We have Epyx911 coming out of retirement to talk about VR for a little bit. And we also have our first ever developer, Chris McLaughlin of Vitae Backroom, developer of Paper Valley. He's joining us this episode as well. And so why don't we actually, well, first, let me check with Gary. Gary, how's everything going on there in jolly old England?
It's the same as always. We can just sort of skip past me, to be honest, because it's always a little bit mundane. I've been watching a little bit of snooker today. I don't know if anybody's got any interest in snooker, but it's the World Championships at the minute. So, yeah, I've been enjoying that. But other than that, there's not a lot been going on. We'll move on, Anthony.
Okay, and Epyx?
I actually enjoy snooker. So.
Oh, cool.
Did you try the Maxi Pool Masters VR?
Not yet, no, but I know I've heard you mention it, and also, you know, I really love Sports Bar VR. I think because the pool, from a game that came out so long ago, I really enjoyed that. It's like a pool simulation. It works really well.
Okay, Epyx, what about you, man? How's it been going? You're doing this new history thing, right?
Yeah, that's it's still going to be my main kind of pet project. Really enjoying it. You know how it is when you start from scratch, right? A nice slow build up. And I'm off camera, which is kind of nice for a change. But I've been getting the itch, and I'm probably going to do a weekly VR show again at some point. And this time, kind of stick to that. I've had discussions with people, so expect a weekly show with much better editing. I learned a lot about editing working on the history, so that's kind of where I'm at, and I expect to bring that into the VR news show.
Awesome. Okay, we'll probably have a link in our description to your history show as well, so people can find you there. Cool. Okay, so and we do have a special guest, like I was saying this week. We have Chris McLaughlin, developer of Paper Valley, lead programmer or design lead, and
programmer. So that makes me the lead programmer.
Okay, and I believe we've all played Paper Valley, so we can kind of do a quick little roundtable discussion on our thoughts on Paper Valley. Epyx, did you ever get a chance to play that or no?
Guilty as charged. No, I saw that on the notes just the other day. Haven't had a chance yet.
Okay.
But that's okay. That's okay, because I can ask questions based on what I'm hearing, and I'll let you guys continue.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't I then kick it to Gary? Gary, I mean, obviously, we actually talked about this a little bit last week, but with Chris here, we should probably kind of recap it a little bit. I understand you finished Paper Valley.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I played through last week when we spoke about it. I played around about just under an hour, I think it was in total. So I did about the first 4 sections within the game. But yeah, since then, so I've gone back in and I've played through the rest of the game. You know, I think pretty much what I said last week sort of carries on throughout the rest of the game. The final section was actually pretty special, and there's things I want to actually ask Chris about this. I don't know how much you'll be able to tell us, because there's obviously something underlying that's going on within this game, similar to things like when you play like these games, and I mentioned this as a comparison last week.
I have played this.
Oh, okay.
I have played this. I recognize it as soon as I see it up on the screen here.
But
sorry, guys.
On like Zing, for example, there's things underlying that are not immediately apparent on the surface. And when I heard Alex on last week's episode of VR Hounds, I watched that. So Alex from Vitae Backroom, he was talking about there's things going on with the narrative in this game, and you know they're not immediately obvious and that kind of stuff. I'm sure you don't want to give anything away, Chris, talking about this, but I just wonder if you could tell us sort of anything about that at all. What sort of where that's going and what we should look out for, really.
Yeah, it's to be honest, like the story I think has turned out to be a lot subtler than we expected it to be, and like we very deliberately made it like the game is about throwing paper planes and the focus is all about paper planes, and there's this story there for you to see and interpret however you like, kind of by yourself. I don't think we need to go like full Jonathan Blow. Like I'm never talking about the story. Make it all up yourself. But we very deliberately didn't make a point of saying this is what's happening now. Look over here and see what's happening.
Yeah.
there's this kind of like, we've got the whole backstory here, and to be honest, I can't even remember all of it. It's quite deep in places, or it's a rabbit hole that goes down. But there's kind of, you're in this world and it's clearly dead, and something has happened to make it dead. And like as you progress through the world, you see these sort of big giant shapes, and they look like giant people sort of towering over you, and they've got these weird floating things that might be heads. And you're going through the world and bringing everything back to life. And you'll see, if you finish the first level, there's this sort of tiny little dude standing beside the exit, and nothing ever gets explained about him, which I can imagine looking from the outside, most people are like, what is this guy? What's he doing here? And hopefully the idea is that the player looks at it and fills that in themselves, and maybe not even fills it in, but makes up a reason in their head, why is this guy here? And we kind of want the story to be as much about what you think the story is as what we decided the story is. So it's hard to say this is the story, because in our minds, the story is kind of the story of you being in this world. Yeah. But there's definitely, like, you're bringing a world back to life, and if you get to the end, you can see like there's a couple of things that happen that are like, it's really hard to say, because I can't imagine playing it without knowing everything about it. It's like when you get the almost end bit and then the end bit, I don't know what people would actually think about it, if they would even notice it, or they're just like, oh, I've just hit the next target, great, what's next?
Well, I think that's sort of the good thing about this game, because you can play it like that, can't you? You can just play it as, I'm just hitting the next target. Yeah. But to have that knowledge, to know that there's something else going on, within this game that if you want it, you can look out for and try to spot all these little subtle hints to the story behind it. I think that's one of the most interesting things. And honestly, it makes me want to, because I wasn't aware of that until I sort of probably got around sort of an hour into the game. You start thinking, there's more going on here. What should I be looking out for, and that kind of stuff. So it's good. It's got these different layers.
Yeah, I really like it. And I like it because a lot of it happened without me being aware of what was going on, kind of. Like, I'd be just doing my work, and then I would realise that the artist had put like a new giant statue in this place. And when I realised it, it was just like, whoa. Totally, oh right, now I see this thing that you've put here ties this level into that level. Like, for example, the very end of the first level, there's a whole bunch of giants like far away in the distance, and it's not 100% obvious, but when you move to the sort of hub area, that's what you could see from the end of the first area. And like the first time I realized that, I was like, oh wow, you've really thought about this.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah,
so it's cool. I like it that even I'm not aware of all the tiny things that are hidden in there.
And Anthony, because I've spoken, I've finished the game now and I've got to the ending. Did you play any more of this?
I just played it that one initial time. I kind of have this habit where these games come in, and you hit them real hard that first initial week, and then it's like there's always other games. I'm playing this other game right now that I can't talk about, but it's kind of just always on to the next. But I really enjoyed my time with it. The thing that I felt about Paper Valley, and I think this is true for VR in general, it's like so many of these VR games are very, they want to be boots on the ground. You're surrounded by a world. You got zombies, machine guns, all that type of thing. And every once in a while, you need to have what I like to call a palate cleanser. You need to have something to kind of like clear your, just clear it a little bit. And I feel like Paper Valley is very chill. It's very relaxing. I'm curious what the sales of this game are going to be in certain states in the United States, like Washington and Oregon and Colorado, because it's a very chill game. But yeah, no, it's a relaxing, chill kind of a game, and we don't get a lot of that. I mean, we get it here and there, and it'll be interesting to see how that does. But Epyx, so you did play this at some point. What were your thoughts?
I remember it being very relaxing, but there's a name change to this game. I think that's what's throwing me off. Is that right?
Yeah, that was called Paper Garden originally.
That's right, and I think that's what threw me off. And what was the reason for the name change?
The reason was there's a mobile phone app by Samsung called Paper Garden, and we just decided that like it's not a video game. It's not about throwing paper planes, but it was just like there's no point in even being in dangerous territory there, so we'll change it. And to be honest, it worked out.
Fantastic. Okay, so I remember enjoying the game, but as with Anthony, and I'm sure with Gary, there's so many different types of games, and I remember it was a game that I definitely wanted to get back to. But if you've seen my Steam library, and I'm sure Anthony's, Gary's, yours is that close, it's filled with games. But it made a good impression. But at the time, it wasn't finished yet, and I believe that was the issue with it. But now that I know, I'll definitely try it again.
Excellent.
The last few recommendations have been fantastic. So,
Chris, I wanted to ask you. So I'm sure that as a developer of this game, you've probably read countless reviews, around the internet and impressions and different podcasts and everybody's feelings on the game. And I don't know if other people got the same kind of vibe, but I know me and Gary, we both felt like this game reminded us in certain ways of two other VR games, namely Windlands and then also Zing: The Land Beyond. And Windlands maybe from a graphical aesthetic, and then Zing with just kind of like the chill, relaxed nature of the game. And I'm wondering did you hear this a lot in other people's impressions? And was this something that any of you got, like, did you guys play these other games, or was it just random that it kind of ended up being somewhat similar in certain ways?
I've not really spotted people saying. I think maybe I've seen one other person saying it's got a similar style to Windlands. I'd never even heard of Zing until you guys talked about it last week, and I've still not played it. It's now on my Steam list of games to play one day.
I've got a question for you from a developer point of view, if I could.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so just curious, I actually started IT programming and game programming, making roguelikes, and worked for Electronic Arts once upon a time. What are you using in terms of programming languages or tool sets to create this?
Unity and C Sharp.
Right, so C Sharp.
Games nowadays, really.
Yeah, there's not much Java anymore, even with Unity, right? It's pretty much all C Sharp now.
They focus pretty much on all C Sharp now, yeah.
Right.
Just on that point, actually, because I had a question a bit later on that I wanted to get into about this programming thing. I wanted to talk a little bit about your roots in programming, in terms of like where it originated. Because I was like, I grew up. I had an Amiga, a Commodore Amiga back in the 90s, and I got into like this programming language like the Amos and that kind of stuff. It was basic programming language.
That was awesome.
Yeah, it really was. And I made a few games in that, but I never sort of persevered with it. And I've never done any object-oriented programming or anything like that. And I'd love to really sort of dive back in and do stuff with Unity and that kind of stuff. But I wanted to ask you sort of where were your origins with programming, and if you can talk about sort of what led up to you doing it as a career, really.
Yeah. The brief version is that my family got a Spectrum Plus 3 when I was very young, and I remember like it came with this big book with like all about the computer, like how the computer works, how the computer's made, and then at the back it was all these programs you could type in, and I typed in like a Breakout clone, and this was when I must have been like 7 or 8 or 9, I can't remember, pretty young, and I remember like I was typing in and I was just astounded that somebody must have written this in the first place and understood what all of these words meant. Like I was just copying the characters down. Like I had no idea what it means when it says push and poke and go to and loop and whatever. But I was just like, somebody understands all of this. That is so cool. So I guess I was just like, I liked computers from then on. Like on the, what do we have next? We had a 386 or 486, and it came with QBasic. The Gorillas game. I don't know if you ever played or remember.
Oh yeah, with the bananas, yeah.
So like I guess my first real programming was taking those and like just changing lines and giving you extra bananas and making the explosions bigger and stuff like that. And then fast forward a long time, I went to university to study computer games technology in Dundee at Abertay, which is a pretty good course. And then I got a job. I worked in Zoe Mode in Brighton for a long time. Worked on some great games, and then I worked on games like Zumba and SingStar, and no, I didn't work on SingStar, Sing It, the sort of Disney version. So like the games I worked on were like, some were great. I worked on Crush and Chime, which were like amazing and people loved them. And then I worked on a Zumba game, which like probably sold a lot, but it wasn't like the highlight of my career. And then eventually I moved to Japan, worked at Vitae, doing lots of prototypes. I've done lots of prototypes at lots of different companies. And Vitae mostly doing prototypes.
That's one thing. Sorry to interrupt. There's one thing that I wanted to ask about Vitae as well, because looking at the website, there seems to be like you've done a few VR games, and it feels like that the other two that are referenced on the website, I've got them listed down here actually. So it's the Modern Zombie Taxi Company and then A Tiny Escape, and it feels like they were, I don't want to say like experiments in VR, but one of them was made in around 5 weeks, I believe. So it was sort of a prototype for a game. I wanted to ask sort of, during that time when you guys were making those games, what did you learn about VR and how did that lead to what you sort of applied to Paper Valley?
Wow, a lot. Like we started doing VR. We did the original Modern Zombie in 2013, I guess, on a DK1. Like we had a little demo and we just dropped some guys in the back of the car and they were just like ragdolling around and it was amazing. Like, never mind the fact that you were driving a car over ramps and stuff and you were like immediately motion sick. Just forget that. The fact that there was guys in the back of the car was really funny. So that we expanded that out into a full game, which was exciting, and it went a good way, and then it's not gone anywhere since then, which is sad.
It is sad actually, just on that one, because I saw the trailer of it. It does look like a pretty interesting game, especially like you say, the ragdoll physics of these people that you're transporting around. They're just being thrown all around the car. Yeah, it's a shame, but that's what making video games is. You work on a game for a long time and then something totally out of your control means that something happens and it's time to work on the next thing. But because we've been doing that, and because we've been doing it since 2013, like we've learned a lot. Like I can't think of what we've not learned about VR. We did a talk at Unite 2014, 2015, just talking about what to do and not to do in VR. This was in Japan, so I don't think anybody's actually seen it. So just basically 4 or 5 years of constant iterating on VR from the start. It means that it's very hard to say, oh, I learned this thing on that game, and now that's why Paper Valley's like that. It's all become a amorphous blob of stuff that we know. Yeah.
I'm curious, Chris, do you feel like you're going to be programming VR games and maybe AR games as well for the foreseeable future, or do you think you might bounce back and be doing some flat games here and there? Or
I don't know. For the foreseeable future, I think so. Vitae is pretty much all in on this VR thing. That we've worked on other games which aren't on the website for Japanese arcades. They're games that have only been released in Japan in arcades, which is cool. Like that's like I can say I've released an arcade game. That's a total amazing feeling for me. So as a company, we're definitely all in on VR. As a person, awesome. I in my spare time, the little spare time I have, I like to tool around. I make little Pico 8 games, or whatever. It's they're different. They're different mediums. Like some things are better in VR, some things are better on a flat screen, some things are better by getting an Arduino and blinking an LED on and off. So I wouldn't tie myself down and say I'm only going to do VR forever. But at the moment, I think there's just so much opportunity and so much sort of new things.
Absolutely.
That I'm enjoying.
Two quick ones myself. First of all, does your family still have that Specky?
Yes, somewhere.
Oh, awesome.
Up in the attic, I guess it must be there somewhere.
Nice.
I'll be very sad if we don't. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I wish I still had my original Commodore 64. But in terms of end goals or dream VR games, what would you like to kind of work on? It doesn't have to be next. Maybe it's 5 years from now, but is there kind of a dream game?
Wow, that's a really hard question. I don't know the answer. Like
are there genres that you haven't tapped into yet? Maybe genres, RPGs or action game, things that you haven't touched on that you'd like?
No, not really. I think I really like multiplayer stuff. I really like the feeling of being in VR with another person. I think that's great. A tiny escape, just in case you haven't seen the trailer, it's two people, one's a tiny little alien and one's this big robot, and the tiny alien's sort of running around, hiding in drawers and going in cupboards, and the robot's like just smashing the place apart to find them. And just being in another place and knowing that that other player is a human, it's just such an amazing feeling. Like
the scale dynamics and everything.
Especially when you're playing like directly one-on-one, and you can see the emotions just from hand gestures, because we didn't have any like eye tracking or lips and anything like that. But you can see that's a real person. You can see that person is trying to get you. It's a proper amazing feeling of like, wow,
what an awesome dynamic.
Person. So something like that is what I would really, really like to do. Something that like leverages that, I guess is a good word to make.
Yeah, because you hear that get thrown around a lot, that VR isn't social, but I think with your explanation there, and certainly our experiences, I think the opposite is true. I think VR is social, just in a lot of new and innovative ways, and I think that's a perfect example, right?
I think there's a lot of scope for stuff in there. For me, it's when it becomes really personal. I've not played a lot of online VR games. But sort of once there's a bit of distance and it becomes just like a deathmatch shooter or whatever, it doesn't feel quite the same, because they might as well be a bot, or they might as well just be a guy behind the keyboard, because they're flashing around all over the place. But it's when you're like in a really small space together and you can see that person. It's such a cool feeling. So something like that I think I'd like to make.
Awesome.
So at the moment, Paper Valley, it's on the Oculus Store at the moment. I was just talking about the Oculus only. I was thinking, because Oculus Go is coming out now. Obviously, there's a certain number of problems if you wanted to adapt this to the Oculus Go, because you've only got a 3 degrees of freedom controller on the Oculus Go, so you can't do the actual throw-in action. But I was thinking, is there any way that this could be adapted to that? Because I think Oculus and Facebook predict that this will be the device that most people will pick up who have sort of a passing interest in VR, and it seems like a really good opportunity for any games that can be translated to that, whether that they would do that. And I was just thinking about this, if I was like a designer of this game, could it be done? And obviously you've not got the throw mechanic, but if you could somehow have like a button to throw it, and then you've got the 3 degrees of freedom controller to aim it after the fact, is that anything you've thought about, or have you got any plans to do that?
We've thought about it, and we'd love to do it, obviously. And I actually think the throwing would probably be possible. I don't know if you've used a Gear VR with the controller.
I've not, no.
In
I have, yeah.
Oculus Land, they based on the angle, they can kind of fake where your hand really would be. It's not perfect, but it's close enough. So I think we could do that. For the throwing, and it wouldn't be as accurate as using a Vive or a Oculus controller, obviously, but it would probably be close enough to get like some level of power. So I think it would be possible.
Fun,
Great. Yeah. So I think we would love to do it. It's going to depend on like how well the game does, if it's worth us taking to other platforms, I think.
It just seems...
I'd love just to have a shot of an Oculus Go, to be honest.
Yeah. It just seems like a really good opportunity, because if that device does sell in any of the numbers that I think a lot of people are predicting that it will, then it just seems like a great opportunity for games developers to try and transfer some of their games over to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, guys. Well, we should probably get started on the news. We do have quite a bit of news stories this week. Why don't we go ahead and kick it off with Pimax, which Pimax has been in the news recently. We've got actually a couple of Pimax stories. The first one is that there's another delay. And so basically what's going on here is Pimax has had this plan for quite some time now, where what they wanted to do is they wanted to dial in this M1 prototype that would basically kind of be their final consumer version. Well, they're hoping it would be their final consumer version, and then this M1 prototype would go to a hand-picked group of beta testers. They would run it through its paces over a number of weeks, and assuming that there weren't any major issues with it, that would basically be consumer version number 1. And so we were kind of waiting for this M1. It was going to go to these beta testers, and that was going to start the ball rolling. Well, what we found out recently is that there is some problem. Well, they've had some problems with the lens design. I believe they've gone through 3 different versions of their lens, and each time they want to alter this, it's somewhere between about 50 grand and 100 grand to actually make these alterations to the lens design. And so that's gotten expensive for them, but they've redesigned it again. And then the other big issue that we're having now is they've had problems with the 90 hertz issue, and they've thought about going for 85 hertz. And so now it appears they've kind of settled in on the 80 hertz thing. And a lot of Kickstarter backers are a little bit concerned about all of this. They kind of feel like it's changing before their very eyes. So some issues there. Why don't I kick it over to Gary? Gary, what is your thoughts on this continued delay, another 60 to 90 days probably on the delay, and now down to this 80 hertz refresh rate?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm sure it's a disappointment to people that have backed this. I think most people that went into this Pimax originally, the Kickstarter, I think they sort of predicted some kind of delays with this device, because I think originally they promised it to go out to backers in January, but that I don't think many people really expected that to happen. Almost you hear it all the time, these Kickstarters that are delayed, and they're delayed. So to some extent, I think there was an expectation of this, but I think as well, at this point, it's got to be frustrating. You've got to just want to get your hands on one of these things. Now, the fact that the lenses, when you see the original lenses in this device, it's not just the fact that it's got these 2 landscape screens. It's also got these elongated lenses. So to me, when you look at these lenses, they look pretty difficult to... I don't know anything about lens manufacture or anything like that, but just from a layman's point of view, they look like they could be potentially pretty difficult to manufacture. So it's sort of understandable, but I guess really when it comes down to it, if I'd backed this, what would I want? I think it's safe to say that I'd rather they take a few extra months and get it right and get the product that I originally expected. So I hope they can deliver that, and I hope there's no more delays after this one, really.
Epyx, what about you? I know you've covered Pimax since the very beginning, so.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said there, Gary. Absolutely. Here's kind of my take on it. My thoughts, at least initially, was I had always wished, basically, the resolution that they were aiming for was a lot to do with marketing, right? The whole fiasco with the naming versus what you're actually getting as a resolution. What I would have loved to have seen is them just be honest with themselves, aim for something like Vive Pro resolution, and make the focus of the Pimax, which is really its strength, is that larger field of view. I think that's the main thing it has going for it design-wise, even above and beyond the resolution, is that larger field of view. Because now they've kind of backed themselves in a corner. And again, if we're being honest, the performance, it's barely there for Vive Pro stuff. For most people's video cards, it's certainly not there for 4K, 8K yet, for a lot of apps, a lot of different types of VR game experiences. So I had wished they would have gone for a lower resolution, higher refresh rate, and basically just focus on that field of view. Keep that field of view the front of their marketing instead of the resolution, because now, like I say, they kind of back themselves where they've had to dial back the refresh rate, which makes sense because otherwise 90 hertz refresh rate programming wise, and Chris, you'd probably be better to speak to this, but you'd think there'd have to be a lot of frame skipping or alternate frame rendering to just kind of get that performance at 90. And again, realistically, they've had to dial it back to 80, which I think is unfortunate, but kind of saw that coming, yeah.
Yeah, Chris, actually, why don't we ask you about, from the standpoint, I mean, you're primarily developing VR games, and we've had the Vive, and we've had the Rift, and there's PlayStation VR, and the Windows mixed reality as well, and all of those headsets are relatively similar in their concept, and then you have this oddball, the Pimax 8K with the super wide field of view. Is this something that you're looking forward to as a developer to maybe screwing around with what you can do with this extra field of view? Or do you look at it as more of an oddball and like, well, that's interesting, but we're going to wait until like the whole industry is moving in that direction?
A bit of both, really. Yeah, I would love to have a shot and play with it and try and make something that takes advantage of that. But because it's the only one that's that wide, like Star VR or whatever the IMAX, actual IMAX one is called, it's also wide. I don't know if it's quite as wide, but it's pretty big. Yeah. Those are the only ones which come sort of close to that. So for most of the VR world, they're not going to, unless Pimax like takes off massively and sells like anywhere near Oculus or Vive numbers, which is a really high target. Probably most games won't actually take much of advantage of that. They'll just be like, "I will recompile it, or we'll set a flag, or whatever." Maybe you don't have to do anything, which just renders the camera view wider. But then you've kind of got this wasted space all the way. You can't see my hands out here. I guess it's not wasted space because it's all about your peripheral vision at that point. It's not really about, you're not going to put your ammo count over here where you can just see it, but you have something. Whereas if you're designing a game for that, you'll put like bad guys that sneak up like right on the edge of your field of view because you know that someone can see them or whatever. So I think there'll be, I can't see a lot of companies building Pimax specific games until there's like a critical mass of headsets out there. It will be very much a kind of toy, I think, for most developers. An interesting thing, and maybe we'll have some Easter eggs for that, but since the rest of the market is going to be much bigger, all of the focus is going to end up being on that, I think.
All right, and so some other Pimax news, and this is kind of more of the news of this week, is that Pimax has shown off their Knuckles-like controllers. And so what we got going on here is it's a little bit misleading because you'll see a lot of the news titles on different websites and stuff that Pimax has Knuckles controllers. And if you're not paying close attention to this, you could think, oh, they've got the actual plans from Valve and they're making their own Knuckles controllers, and these are legit Knuckles controllers. They're just going to, the Pimax design, but these are the real Knuckles controllers. Not exactly. It's more like they're kind of doing their best impression of it. And the one thing I'll say about it, just personally, is I kind of respect the fact that they're trying something, because one of the things I've been disappointed with in relation to like HTC Vive, we've had the HTC Vive since April of 2016, and they've had the same old wands, and I remember when I got my Vive in April of 2016, the wands, they felt very next gen. I mean, they felt good, it felt like a high quality device, and it was kind of, oh, this is really next gen. But 2 years later, I feel like if nothing else, they could take that wand and just put it in a shrinking machine and just reduce it by like 25%, just the bulk of it or something. There's some minor things they could do. And we have another story coming up later, but, at least Pimax is trying here. Why don't I kick it over to Epyx first? Epyx, you saw the pictures of these Knuckles-like design. What do you think about this?
Well, I think you nailed it. And what I love, and I want to bash on these guys because I do, like you, respect the fact that, look, they're trying. I kind of wish they'd be honest with what they're trying to do. And there's a quote in the story that they have had an intensive design process. Well, an intensive design process in what? In copying and borrowing? Absolutely, I'd agree. Look at the iterations that it's gone through. The first two are clearly Vive wand designs, right? Yeah. The third one is a mashup of the touch controller and the Vive wand. And by the time you kind of get to the end, the last few iterations, it looks like a bunch of guys, one too many wobbly pops, basically just trying to mash the two together. So I see what you're saying about the Knuckles design, but to me, it's just very Vive wand, Oculus Touch influenced, and trying to mash those two together to come up with a design that still kind of looks innovative. But to me, it's a lot of borrowing in each of those iterations. I think it's great, there's nothing wrong with that. Just be honest with that. That's all.
Yeah, Gary, one of the interesting things about their controller, one of the nice things they are doing is this is another thing that I'm impressed with Pimax to a certain degree, is the fact that if nothing else, they're definitely listening to their fan base. They really are paying attention to their fan base, and one thing that they continue to hear repeatedly is that some of their fans are absolutely adamant about the fact that there be a thumbstick version. And then some of them want a trackpad version. And so apparently they're going to be offering both varieties, which is nice. It may be confusing for developers to have to deal with, but it's nice for the end consumer. I can tell you personally, ever since I've gotten my Oculus Rift and I've gotten used to the thumbstick, if there's one thing I could convince Valve, it would be, please put a thumbstick on the Knuckles, and I know they're not going to do that, and it just infuriates me to a certain degree. But Gary, what do you think about the fact that they are offering both of these options, and then what's your thoughts on this Knuckles concept?
Well, like you, I think it'd be confusing for developers to have this thing in terms of some users out there are going to have the touchpad, some users are going to have the thumbstick. It's not to say that they can't adapt to that and change the way the games are designed in order to incorporate that, but I think if they do that, it's not going to take advantage of the specific uses of either one.
Right.
It's sort of like with the Vive ones, they're touchpads, and I've said this numerous times. I'm much more of a fan of the Oculus Touch controllers because of the thumbstick than I am of the Vive ones with the touchpad. But that's not to take anything away from some of the things that they've done with that touchpad, especially in the earlier titles, like the Lab, for example, and things like that, where these games have been specifically designed around that. So I think it's confusing for consumers and for developers to have these two options. Just looking at this video, this prototype, it looks very early on to me. It looks like it's sort of been just sort of it's like 3D printed, and there's nothing really there at the moment. That's the only thing I think. I don't know how close these things are. Looking at the earlier prototypes compared to this latest one that they're showing, I will say that I think it looks better. But yeah, like Epyx, I think it's more sort of they're borrowing features and that kind of stuff, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it does look like they're just sort of trying to appeal to the. It almost feels like they're trying to do anything they can to appeal to the widest possible market, no matter what it takes, whether that even removes some of the functionality problems that this device could have.
I think you nailed it. Yeah.
Chris, as a developer, you're obviously, you have to consider these controllers very carefully and plan for your games. I don't know if you guys are going to be working on Steam VR games in the near future, but what's your thoughts in general on where we are at with controllers in VR at this point?
I think like you guys, I prefer the Oculus controllers. Not only for the thumbsticks, they just feel nicer to hold. And like you were saying, Anthony, the Vive ones, especially nowadays, especially after using the Oculus for so long, it just feels giant. It's like, wow, this is like some sort of 80s controller or something. I don't know. And I think they're even though they're like completely different looking, they're similar enough in the way that they work. They've got a trigger, they've got this sort of other weird trigger that no one ever wants to use, and they've got some other buttons. So for the most part, especially for the games that we make, and we always focus on using just the index finger, because that's the obvious one for most people. And our games are all about accessibility and making it nice and easy and clear. But yeah, the moment you want to use sort of more advanced features and like extra buttons, having different types of controllers means you've got these two code paths, so you've got to maintain them both. Other companies are adding on their own new controllers on top of that with their own special abilities. That's a whole bunch of extra stuff to do. I can see one day in the far future where your controller is your hand and there's no special abilities because they're all just your fingers wiggling around. Unless you're making games for people with less fingers, that's like another thing totally. But just now, where everyone's got all these extra buttons, there's just so many different things that could be happening. That kind of dilutes what you have to think about, and you have to think, oh well, what if they're using this controller? What if they're using that controller? I think the thing with this Pimax thing that kind of confuses me is why are they making their own controller? Since their whole thing is focused around being like 100% compatible with Steam and Steam VR 2 or whatever it's called, and they're making like what looks like an identical clone to Knuckles. Why even bother? If I was like a Kickstarter backer, I would be confused. Why are you focusing on this instead of fixing the lenses or whatever?
That's a really good point, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, actually, you brought up an interesting point there, and I wanted to ask you real quick. I don't know if you saw Leap Motion. They have this AR prototype, Project North Star. You might have seen some of the videos that have been tweeted out about it, and it's basically, it's like you were saying, with just your hands, nothing there. And I'm just curious, from a developer's perspective, do you feel like, it's great from a friction standpoint. Like, we really got to deal with friction in VR. It's probably the number one thing that is preventing VR from widespread adoption. You want things to just be super easy, and just having your hands, like, there's not much easier than that. You just put the headset on, you go. But as a developer, the tactile sensations, the little rumbles, the little sensations that you put into your game, to completely let that go, that's got to be incredibly difficult as a developer. I would guess that what you guys would try to do to try to limit the downside of that is you would probably use audio to try to give that feedback there. Is any thoughts about that?
But my thought is, like, I just said that about everything like collapsing until you don't have anything apart from your hands, and then I started thinking, no, that's going to be a total nightmare to write any video game for. Because, like, everyone moves their fingers slightly differently. Like, how do you explain to someone that versus that is a different control? Yeah, that just sounds horrific. But yeah, absolutely, the loss of haptic feedback is a big one. Like, pressing a button feels like you're pressing a button. You did it, and and then the game doesn't respond, and you know that the game's broken, and it's not because you did the control wrong. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you don't have that, you're like, I don't even know if I put my thumb in the right place to trigger the plane throwing or the gun shooting or whatever. Yeah, that's going to be a nightmare, I think, for everybody. One, to programmers to write and make sure it feels good, and two, for users to understand, how do I do this? For some things, like picking up a ball or picking up a thing and dropping it, easy peasy. But the moment you want to do anything that's not a normal thing to do with your hands, it's going to be hard. And because you've got this infinite world of possibilities, of course you're going to write games that do magical things with your hands. Yeah, that's going to be hard. Forget everything I said in the last comment.
Yeah, it's a conundrum, to be sure, because we want just unlimited widespread adoption, and it seems like that would help that. But then, yeah, there's the downsides that come along with it. Okay, why don't we get into the HTC Vive news? And this is kind of interesting because back at CES, Dan O'Brien was on stage, and we got all the news, the Vive Pro, and everybody was shocked by that whole thing. And then, of course, the price of the Vive Pro shocked everybody as well, and that's all anybody was talking about for weeks. And one of the things that Dan O'Brien talked about back at CES, he said that there would be a full bundle, but he said it would be later in the year. And it kind of insinuated, at least I got the impression, we were looking at October, November, maybe September if we're lucky, that kind of later in the year. And all of a sudden, bam, out of nowhere, we get this $1,400 HTC Vive Pro Bundle that has begun a new era. Steam VR 2.0 era has begun. That's one of the great things about this. At least, that era has been kickstarted. But this bundle, it features 2 Vive wands that have blue paint, yes, and it has the new sensors and it has the new base stations. Why don't I kick it over to Gary? Gary, when you first saw this, were you shocked that this was starting this quickly, or what were you thinking about that?
Yeah, that was the biggest thing. It wasn't even the price, because I can't be shocked by price when it comes to HTC anymore. But I think that the biggest thing was just the fact that this came out just a few weeks. this is now available, and it's only been a few weeks. It really seems weird to me, and I can definitely. There was a lot of people that were very angry about the fact that they've jumped on board and they've bought a Vive Pro, and if this bundle was, they knew that this bundle was going to be released only a few weeks later, then they would have waited and got the full bundle. So I think it's a bit of a problem for them, and I struggle. I don't know what they're doing, honestly, HTC. And I don't want to say that, because I loved my Vive. I've got nothing against HTC at all. I know that people have problems with their support. My experience with them was actually very, very good. So I've got no problem with HTC as a company from what I've seen so far. I love my Vive. I think it was a fantastic product. What they're doing with this version, the Vive Pro, just confuses me more than anything. So yeah, I think it's got to be frustrating if you were waiting for this bundle but decided to jump on a little bit earlier because you didn't know when it was coming out.
Epyx?
Confusion, absolutely the order of the day. Look at the name of the bundle. It's an enterprise bundle. I think that's the official name, Vive Enterprise. Yet, to truly use it as an enterprise bundle, you've got to pay an additional $200 US over the $1,400 to be able to use it commercially. That, to me, it just extends the confusion. Either up the price a little bit more even and just bundle that functionality in. That separation confuses me. It's an enterprise bundle, or isn't it? And if it is, why are we paying $200 more to use it commercially? That should have been all in my opinion.
Yeah, I think what's going on there is, the truth of the matter is, I mean, here's what I think HTC is doing. And in some ways, I feel bad for them in certain ways, because I don't know that this was like their grand scheme that they've been planning in the back room all along. The Steam VR thing, you got to understand that they're at the mercy of Valve. And so it's possible they came out with their Vive Pro because they were, the first Vive Pro, the $1,100 one, they came out with that, and maybe they were still waiting for Valve. And then maybe they came out with it, and 3 days later, Valve's like, okay, guess what? You can start, we're good to go. You can start shipping the new Lighthouses 2.0 if you'd like to. And they're like, oh, okay, you kind of caught us off guard there. Now this is the best case scenario, really, that I'm trying to outlay here. But then on the pricing side as well, the one thing I want to say is HTC, they're not the healthiest company in town. They're not like, they don't have unlimited revenues pouring in. In fact, if anything, they're a leaky boat, and some people are like jumping off of that boat. Some of their executives have bounced in recent time. And I kind of look at this pricing scenario as basically they're just juicing their early adopters, they're the most hungry people out there, developers, the VR, the arcade market as well. They're juicing all of that, and they're basically saying, let's try to get the maximum revenues, maximum profit that we can for a short window of time, and we'll eventually tax all of these people, and they'll fall off a cliff, and then there won't be that much more of them, and then at that point we're going to have to lower our price and become a little bit more mass market. So I kind of see it like that. Chris, I mean, I know you're just kind of watching this from the sidelines. You probably don't really care too much about all of these sorts of things, but just generally in the market, what do you kind of think about this higher end package and just that market in general?
It's, to me, it's a very confusing thing. Again, like it's so expensive. I can understand that it's their enterprise version that's available to consumers. But yeah, why don't they bundle the whole enterprise thing together? I get the feeling that maybe they were focused on building this as an actual enterprise product, and then the consumer desire for something new and better and whatever, they were like, oh, well, let's just sell this anyway. Why not? Who cares? We can make a bit more money here, but at least as far as I know, the VR arcade market in China especially is insane, like huge. So I wouldn't be surprised if they built this like 100% for arcade markets and like whatever other enterprises want to use it, architects and anything else. And the fact that we as normal people can get access to it, that's just like well, why not? It's only like this one team of 20 people for 2 months to get it ready. Just do it, and then the people who are willing to spend that much money, they'll spend kind of whatever we ask for almost. So I wonder if that's the thought process, or if what. But as a developer and as a VR watcher, I guess these high prices not confuse me, but I think they're one of the things that has to go to make VR really mass market. I don't know anybody really who would spend that much money on a VR kit. Like you're yourselves accepted. I don't even know if you would spend that much money on on a VR.
You know,
it's like so far beyond, and for mass market and for VR to take off, like the price has to come down to like Oculus Go level to be viable.
And you can see, Chris, look at all our backgrounds. We like our toys, but I think all three of us are in agreement. This is out of our price range, right?
Yeah.
You know, the arcade market, though, that is a good point, especially in Asia, like you're saying, in China, just going absolutely nuts. And even here in the USA, this is something I'm kind of interested in on the side. And I visited a couple VR arcades locally here.
It's big here. Yeah,
they're popping up everywhere, you know. And one of the things you have to like, the average VR gamer is not going to be thinking about VR arcades at all, but HTC, they have to consider that, because if somebody's starting a brand new VR arcade, let's say later this summer, are you going to start it off with the old Vive, with the old base stations, where there could be new controllers, new trackers, new things that could come out, where you're kind of screwed because you bought 10 of the old Vive, you know, so you might get into a screwed situation there. So for the VR arcade market, it kind of makes sense, even though they are really screwing you with these prices, you kind of want to have the newest deal. Epyx, before we leave this topic, this is the beginning of Steam VR Tracking 2.0, and that doesn't mean a hell of a lot right now, but what do you think about like Steam VR 2.0? Because eventually we're going to be able to add another 2 of these base stations, and you could do 10 meters by 10 meters with 4 base stations.
Yeah, I love that aspect of it. And if you've got the space, and not to use us three as an example again, but I'm going to use us as an example. We probably have that kind of space, right, somewhere. I don't know about you, Gary. If
no, I don't.
No,
yeah.
But I know Anthony does, and I've got that kind of space. But that goes back, for me, it goes back to what we just talked about, and that's, I think HTC's biggest issue is they've kind of blurred the lines too much in terms of what they want the hardware to do and for what consumer they want it to do that, right? And that's in the pricing. Look, we had a bunch of scenarios there. We talked about China with the arcades, and I know here in Halifax they're pretty big. But of the 4 VR arcades that I've been into, only one, which was a commercial one, actually did the software licensing properly. The other ones are all just running Steam, the non-commercial version, right? Which doesn't help the developers much. It's almost kind of like video rentals if you look at it that way. But yeah, I think HTC, they really need to sit down, and they just got to make their whole kit, the whole bundle, less confusing. What demographics, what kind of end users are you aiming for with your hardware? And I think right now, most users are going to think along the lines that we're thinking, I don't want to spend any more money. And 1.5 isn't a big enough argument for me to spend that kind of money. And by extension, 2.0. I'm probably going to stay pat at this point until something really kind of wows me that comes along.
All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get into the next story? And this is actually probably the biggest single story of the week. And so we're here in the VR gaming market and AR as well. And we know that one of the biggest sleeping giants that is out there is Apple. And when you see a product like Magic Leap 1, you know that they are basically gunning for Apple's bread and butter, you know, because the smartphone industry, Microsoft missed the boat on that. I mean, there's a lot of companies that they missed the boat on the whole smartphone thing. And so a lot of these companies are thinking, well, what's the next boat? The next boat is VR, AR. It's basically a smartphone on your face and that kind of a thing. And so Apple they know that they've got to protect the throne. They have to come up with their own product. They've got all these competitors that are gunning for them. And we know that eventually Apple is going to have a product. And so the rumor that we're hearing right now is this is based on a CNET story. There's a reporter at CNET that has cited an unnamed source that is saying that Apple is targeting 2020 for the release of a AR/VR headset that is going to be wireless, and it's going to feature 8K resolution, legitimate 8K resolution to each individual eye. Now, the wireless thing is a little bit misleading, because basically what they're going to be doing here supposedly is you're going to have some type of processing unit, some type of box that will be located somewhere in your room, and then you'll have a degree of freedom that you'll be able to move away from that box and be able to wirelessly go anywhere. And one of the nice theories with that design is, you look at Magic Leap, you look at Santa Cruz, you look at HoloLens. So HoloLens and Santa Cruz, they're putting the technology in the headset itself, which adds a lot of weight. I've heard people that have used HoloLens for an extended period of time, and they say it just gets really heavy on you, and it's got all that CPU, GPU processing in it. Then you look at Magic Leap, they thought, well, hey, what can we do here? We can take out the CPU, GPU processing, we can put it on your hip or a shoulder strap with their little light pack that's going to have all that processing in there. And then that way, the goggles are much more lightweight. They could be more streamlined. They could look a little bit cooler. And then so you have Apple, they're looking at this thing and they're like, well, we really want that streamlined idea. That makes a lot of sense. But we don't want to put something on your hip or your shoulder. So we're going to have a processing box. It's going to be somewhere around you. We don't know what kind of range you're going to get. Can you go out to the backyard? Is it just going to be in the same room? So lots of interesting stuff here. Gary, why don't I kick it over to you? I'm sure you saw a lot of this. What was the stuff that really jumped out to you about it?
Well, I think pretty much what you've mentioned. I mean, the main point on this is the fact that they're targeting sort of 8K per eye, which is sort of a very, very high resolution from what we know today. And it's not going to be coming out until 2020. But even with that in mind, there's got to be a lot of questions in terms of sending that much data over from a wireless processing box in the first place, but also the processing power required for that kind of stuff. And obviously, I think it spoke about it in this article, how it will have foveated rendering in order to combat all these processing issues and that kind of stuff. It's an interesting thing. I don't know how much weight to put in this report, because it's still a long time. It's still 2 years away. A lot can change with that, and it just feels like, of course, Apple are working on these things. They're working on AR primarily, from what we've heard firsthand from Tim Cook, for example. So we know that they're working on these things, but I don't know how much weight to put in this specific report about this device, 8K per eye and wireless. But yeah, it's interesting either way, because we love getting these little early snippets of news stories coming out.
Yeah, Epyx, we've heard a lot about AR and Apple, and it seemed like a natural fit. In fact, I think most people, like the Intel Vaunt smart glasses that got canceled recently, like that almost looked like an Apple product. That looked like the type of thing Apple might bring out. But now we're hearing that VR is actually a legitimate part of this thing. Did that surprise you a little bit?
Yeah, that absolutely surprised me. Let's be honest. The last time Apple really has been relevant for one of their PCs doing gaming, you got to go all the way back to the Apple II in the 1980s. You can make an argument that the iPad and certainly the iPhones, with the Apple Store, sure, they've catered to gaming. But if you look at the Apple PCs, they haven't been about gaming for decades. They're great at innovative design, but they are completely out of it when it comes to gaming. They just don't understand. I mean, you've got Apples out there with great processor CPU-wise, but look at the GPU specs. They're abysmal. There's not much 3D stuff that you can run on an Apple PC. Now, I know that's getting slightly better. So yeah, when I look at the 8K, as with Gary, I'm thinking, forget the processing power of the CPU. What kind of GPU, even with foveated rendering, are you going to get to be able to push 8K per eye? And sure, you might be able to push that, but the thing with mobile GPUs, remember, is you don't have the same type of texture complexity that you've got on a desktop PC, right? We're talking about...
Well, this isn't going to be mobile, though, necessarily, because you're going to have this processing box, and then one of the other little tidbits of I know what you're talking about with Apple and hardware, and it's a well-known reality, but they've decided to drop Intel, and they're making their own chips. They've acquired all these different companies. Supposedly, they have some magical chip that is going to take them so far beyond what Intel and NVIDIA and everybody else is doing. I don't know how they're going to do that.
Yeah, maybe they do, but I'm skeptical at this point. They just don't have the gaming experience. But yeah, I'd be interesting to hear your opinion, Chris.
It's very much the same, I think. Is like I don't really. What is this special box? That would be a big question to me. Is it like just a wireless transceiver of sorts, or is it a computer? And then if it's like just a wireless box, like a big wireless box, who knows? You then need like an iMac Pro from like 2020 to run it, and iMac Pros take a very long time to come out, so like they're going to have to be iterating on that very, very quickly comparatively. They've already said that the next one's not for another year, so that's 2019. So when that comes out, it's going to have to be capable of like 8K on one screen by itself, like more than that to hit their target of double 8K the next year. So that to me just sounds insane. Any computer doing 8K on two screens, like in 2020, just sounds ridiculous. It'd be awesome. Like I'm sure you could do it if you got like a bunch of 1080 Titans and bundle them all together and got them to render things instead of mining bitcoins or whatever. And then probably do something, but that's going to be a huge box.
So you don't think foveated rendering is this magical solution that will solve everything?
No, I think it will help massively in a lot of places. But again, it's like a totally untested technology. Like everyone who's working on it, obviously, they're saying, "Oh, this is great. It works brilliant. Trust us." And I've never seen it. I don't know anyone else who has actually experienced it. And like the tech makes sense, of course. Why would you not do that? But I can't imagine it being the silver bullet to solve all the problems.
Oh, if I could just add to that when you're done, Chris. Yeah,
on you go.
No, the only reason I suggested mobile is just because that's the only gaming experience that they really have GPU-wise is through their mobile processors and their mobile GPUs. That's kind of why I went there. But again, I ask the question, having something run at 2K mobile versus 2K on a desktop is still not apples to apples because of texture complexity. You could have something run at 2K on mobile that looks nowhere near as good as half that resolution on a desktop if you've got a lot more complex textures and that you're throwing at it. So that's what I'm curious about. How are they going to run this? Is it going to be based on their mobile tech, or like you say, Tony, is it some new magical wonder chip?
I have to imagine that whatever, like anybody that's going to do legit AK, like really legit AK, it's going to be pretty much 4K and then line doubling, basically, some type of, you know what I mean? I don't think they're going to natively try to really render 8K.
And has Pimax opened the gates to where we can start throwing around 8K and 4K and not really mean 4K and 8K? That's
there's been a lot of that. Right? Yeah, there's been a lot of that this week, hasn't there? Yeah, and it's true. It is true. We need. I've said this before on the show. Actually, we need a better way of just communicating resolution because it's just a nightmare, isn't it? It's just a complete nightmare.
It is.
Isn't it like pixels per degree or something? There's some way to do it where it really makes sense, but nobody's using it.
Yeah, but even taking VR out of it, just resolution in general, even on TVs and stuff like that, you need a better way than saying 4K, because 4K is they've gone from vertical resolution to horizontal resolution, and 4K is basically 4 1080p screens. and that's okay, but they need a better way of communicating all these differences between the resolutions, I think. And I don't think it will be long before we get these new standards, because...
No, you're right, because you could have people argue 3 different ways, and they're all technically right.
Yeah.
So, that's right.
The one thing I am looking forward to, though, like if this really is legit 8K to each eye, hopefully that will finally put the nail in the coffin to screen door effect. I mean, I know it'll probably still barely be there if you really, really look for it, but I think for the most part, it'll probably be dealt with, and I think that would be really huge. Because I think there's some people, you put some average people into VR, and they're expecting it to be way better than it really is, and sometimes they're a little bit disappointed, you know.
Just quickly on that point, going back to Paper Valley quickly, Chris, because I think we've mentioned it before as well, the fact that certain types of graphics, certain stylized graphics, as in Paper Valley, you know, you've got these you've not gone overboard on the textures, you're not gone for this realistic aesthetic or anything like that. And quite often we've mentioned how those types of games look better in VR. Was that something that you was there any reason behind you going for that kind of stylized route in terms of Paper Valley?
Partly we only have one artist, and it's faster to iterate on stuff like that.
Yeah.
Partly definitely because it looks better. If you've not got a lot of fine detail, you don't get shimmering, you don't get the screen door effect to the biggest extent. So it was definitely a conscious decision to make things big and bold and bright. I
think they age better too.
The hardware is like.
Yeah. It's like we mentioned, Winlands and games like that. They just looked. I mean, Paper Valley included in this, and actually Budget Cuts. Budget Cuts is coming out soon, but that looks very, very. It's just got this nice, crisp look to it within VR, and those types of games for me just look far better. And at the moment, you know, I'm playing a lot of Skyrim and Fallout and these kind of stuff, and they do look good, but there's. Like you say, it's the shimmer and these jaggies and all this kind of stuff. You can see the rough
edges, like they stand out because everything else kind of looks great. You just see these rough bits and you're like, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, Gary, you just mentioned Skyrim and Fallout, and we do have a quick little story on that, so we might as well just transition right over to there. So Skyrim VR and Fallout 4 VR, they both have beta updates now. And it's pretty significant, actually, for Oculus Rift owners. I went into Fallout 4 VR with this new beta update and was screwing around with it. And it's a lot better from the control standpoint. It's much more, it feels like it was now built for the Oculus Rift. I didn't play a ton of it. I saw shimmering up the yin-yang on my 970 graphics card. I mean, it was... like Drive Club VR, Vaseline everywhere. But Gary, did you try both Skyrim and Fallout with this new beta?
Yeah, I wanted to just go in there and try it because I've not actually played Fallout since Skyrim came out, but I did go in there and tried it, and it's a lot better as an Oculus Rift owner, because there was this weird thing where some people noticed it, some people didn't, but on the right side of the periphery of your vision, when you turn your head, you get this like weird culling thing happening on the Rift, but you don't really get it on the Vive. And you can sort of get past it, but now they've taken it out and it's much better from that point of view. And obviously from an Oculus Rift point of view as well, the controls do a lot better on Fallout now. So it's workable rather than having to do all these little fixes and these little hacks. In terms of Skyrim, the main one that I had a problem with on this was the fact that where you're walking along with free roam locomotion and then you'll look down and all of a sudden you'll start moving backwards, and I hated that because I like to look around a lot when I'm in Skyrim and moving around, but they've solved that problem as well now, so all these patches have updated both of these things, and I'm pleased that they're still working on both of these games. What we need now, just finally, is Doom VFR Oculus Rift, because that is just so poor, and every time I go in that I'm sort of broken-hearted because I remember playing through it on my Vive and I thought it was a fantastic experience, but on the Rift it's nothing like it. There's something weird going on with how it's being rendered on the Rift, and performance is really bad and all of these things, so hopefully they'll get back onto Doom at some point.
Epyx, I don't know if you've had a chance to try either of these new beta updates.
Yeah, I've been able to try both. For me, the thing I enjoy most about these games normally is the mod support. For me, the Elder Scrolls games, that's always been the thing that I've enjoyed most, is about that year after release when the tools have been available for a while and the mods start coming out from the community. It's graphical enhancements, add quests. I just love packing 100+ mods into a game and just having a game that I know I can play for 200, 300, 400 hours. And we're not at that point yet in VR where the mods are kind of universally working. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's no official support from Bethesda for that. It's a lot of them work now, which is great, but that's kind of still what I'm missing. Have I seen improvements? I was actually one of those people that noticed the culling, and I'm happy to report that is gone now. But yeah, I just want more mod support, basically.
Chris, I imagine you're pretty darn busy and don't have a lot of time to be spending 200 hours in Skyrim or Fallout, but just curious
that's over
if
an extended period, but yeah.
Just curious if you've played around with them.
No, I very, very shamefully have to admit I've never played Skyrim or Fallout 4 in Flatland, never mind VR, so I basically have nothing to add to this. Good to them, good for them for updating.
Yeah.
No, you know what? It's probably a good idea to stay away from it. If you really want to get work done, you kind of want to stay away from those games.
Yeah, maybe I should. But everyone says that they're great, so I'm torn. Yeah, again, they're on my list of games I should play. Just because it's 200 hours, 100 hours even if you want to play a light version. It's quite far down my list.
Well, the nice thing, honestly, with the Bethesda games, Skyrim, if all you're interested in is the main storyline, you can finish it in about 12 hours.
Oh, really?
10 to 12 hours. Oh, yeah. It's not longer.
For me, it's like with both of those games, Fallout and Skyrim, it's not like I ever really want to finish them. I just want them to be there in the background that you can jump into every now and again.
And that's my thing with the mods. It's this big world where no matter what direction I head into, I've got something to do there.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is probably I think our last regular news story is Facebook F8, which I believe is this Tuesday, May 1st, I think.
Yes, yep, that's right.
And that's where Mark Zuckerberg is probably going to walk out on stage and hold up the Oculus Go and say, hey, you can go to Amazon or Oculus.com or Target or whatever. You can buy it right now, $199. There might also be some type of AR-related announcement that could be really weird. But Gary, I know you popped this story on here because Zuckerberg was reaffirming his commitment to VR with an investor quarterly earnings report. Tell us a little bit about that, if you could.
Yeah, I'm not going to read everything that he said because it's quite a long paragraph, but basically what this news story was the fact that he was asked a question specifically at this investor meeting about VR, and his response was sort of very encouraging as somebody who is a fan of VR and AR actually. He was sort of saying more or less that this is it's still very much on their roadmap. It's still very much the path that they want to go down, and it seems to be that they're sort of pushing the Oculus Go kind of iterations of the Rift and of the Oculus platform because it can get into so many people's hands. So I guess it's good and it's encouraging, and if you go on to this upload article and read this, I'll try to remember to put a link in. I know I often say this on the show, but I'll try to remember to put a link into the description so anybody who's interested in this can go and see his response to this question, because it's great that a company like Facebook is still invested within VR this strongly and this heavily. And actually, just on a personal level, I think, because I don't really have an opinion on Mark Zuckerberg, I don't know, I don't know if I like the guy or dislike the guy. He's just sort of there and he's the head of this company. But the fact that somebody who is at the head of this powerful company is so invested in VR I just love that fact, in all honesty.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm excited for Tuesday just because I remember, there was a story a while back where I forget which Oculus executive it was, but somebody was saying that they're going to have their biggest announcement period, bigger than like saying the Rift is now available, bigger than Santa Cruz. And very specifically in the tweet, I think it was Hugo Barra and another guy, they very specifically had AR added in there, like it was a very AR related thing. And we had this topic a while back, and I don't know, there's a part of me that thinks that Zuckerberg is sitting down in his living room and he sees that Recode conference, that had Ronnie Abovitz there with Adam Silver, the head of the NBA, and I could see other companies I could imagine Facebook thinking, well, what if AR is like the real thing? What if it's really AR? And then here's this company, Magic Leap. They're going to come in this year and they're going to be gunning for this. And so if Facebook, one of the things you might want to consider is that if Facebook has any long-term aspirations to really get into the AR game, they might make a major announcement that could shock a ton of people with some type of AR headset that might be 2 years away or something, but something to let people know, look, don't go over to Magic Leap 1. Stay in our family. We will take care of you. I don't know. Am I talking out of my ass here? Let me send it over to Epyx real quick.
No, I get what you're saying, Tony. I can agree with that. The one thing I think that Mark has going for him, and I also agree with you, Gary, in the sense that I don't really have too many thoughts about him one way or the other, but what always stands out for me is there are clips of Mark before the full commercial launch of both the Rift or the Vive, where he definitively said VR is a 10-year engagement. It's a 10-year kind of arcing objective, and don't expect something to happen in 1, 2, 3, 4 years even. That's an actual quote. He did say that. And I think he truly believes this is something that's not going to happen overnight. They're in it for the long haul. And, there's some comfort in that, going back to what you said, Gary, having somebody who's the head of the company truly feeling that this is something, not just lip service, it's going to take 10 years, right, to kind of make investors feel better, but truly believes it's something that's going to take more than just a couple of years to kind of reach market maturity and have critical mass where almost everybody has a VR unit. As for the AR stuff, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to Tuesday.
Chris, what about your thoughts? Do you guys have any interest in AR too much, or is it something you're kind of watching on the sideline? Do you think there's a chance that Oculus could announce some major AR headset for the future, and would that be a mistake? Would it confuse things too much, or, who knows?
That's a good question. I think we don't have a particular interest in VR, but we're not working on any AR stuff at the moment. Just the contracts we're doing are VR, I guess. But AR is super interesting. But I think Oculus could very, very easily turn around Tuesday, maybe, and say, guys, we've got this AR headset. If Santa Cruz is working, all the tech to make Santa Cruz work is the same tech you need to make AR work, or make general AR work. So yeah, just put a semi-transparent screen or a couple of cameras on the front, job done, no problem. Forget the hundreds of thousands of man hours to get it done. But theoretically, the magical leap from Santa Cruz to an AR platform is very, very small. And if Santa Cruz is as far along as it seems to be, then yeah, why would they not be looking at that? Especially like you say, Epyx, that Mark has said that there's this 10-year plan, and I think when he said that originally, we were very because when they bought Oculus, everyone was like, uh-oh, this is going to be terrible, and then he's like, it's fine, we're just not going to touch it for 10 years and let them do their own thing. And that was very reassuring for us as developers, that they're not going to come in and ruin stuff. But it does show that he's committed, that he thinks this is a long-term plan. It's not going to change overnight. It's going to take time, and it's going to be there, and they're going to be there every step of the way. So yeah, I guess I'm agreeing with everybody here.
Yeah, if I could just add one more thing to that quickly and I think we had this conversation a few shows back, either my first or second show, Tony, I think you brought it up, was when I think of AR and VR, I don't even necessarily lump them together. I think they're mutually exclusive of each other. They're not technologies that I think directly even compete with each other. When I think of VR, I think of VR experiences and games, completely different than how I think of AR. AR to me is almost an extension of entertainment. It's bringing that NHL hockey game, or I'm not going to say NBA because whatever sports or concerts, bringing them into your living room and viewing them as if you were there at that venue. So different from how I kind of view VR. Does that make any sense?
No, I absolutely agree with you. I consider VR exactly the same as you. I think it's gaming and it's experiences and that kind of stuff. AR to me is far more... AR has, in the long run, I think AR has a more positive, a more mainstream future, let me put it that way.
Yeah.
Because exactly like Ronnie Abovitz was saying, it can be a device that is just one device that can replace so many other things. You can replace your mobile phone, you could replace a desktop or a laptop PC. Now, I'm not saying that desktop or laptop PCs will go away, because the processing power will always be required for enthusiasts in certain areas that require the extra processing. But I think for a mainstream audience, my parents or my brother and my sister, who could just purchase a pair of AR glasses and it will be their TV, it will be their mobile phone, it will be their computer. To me, that's the future, and that's really where I see AR going. VR is along a different path, in my mind, at least.
Alrighty, well, as far as games go, we don't really have any games to talk about. Other than, obviously we talked about Paper Valley at the beginning there, but normally we do have some game discussion, but not really. But what we did want to talk about real quick is there was a trailer for a new game that's going to be coming relatively soon. This one is called Sacralith, the Archer's Tale. And I don't have the developer in front of me. I know it's Odd something. But this trailer was released very recently, and it's probably playing on the screen right now. Epyx, I don't know. This Sacralith and Archer's Tale, I actually remember hearing about this a long time ago and seeing maybe a couple of screenshots here or there. And that's something that happens in the VR industry is we'll hear about a game and it disappears for a couple of years, and maybe you think it was canceled, but no, they're working on it. They're working on it in the back rooms, they're slaving away on it, and now it appears to be getting a little bit closer to release. We've got a lot of bow archery games, but they can be very good. Epyx, I don't know, have you ever played In Death? It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I love In Death. There's one game that one of my favorite archery experiences. It's called Wrath of the Fire God, and it's a VR game. Not a lot of people have tried it when I asked, but it's still my go-to archery game. I just love it. I can load it up, and you're on a moving platform, and it's so much fun. It's just adrenaline-pounding fun for me. But this one, what really appeals to me in the trailer anyways, was the graphics. And I love when companies claim in-depth, amazing storyline, because so often you get the visuals, and then you don't get the amazing storyline to go with it. So if it can truly deliver that and have the good archery physics and everything else that goes along with it, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Have you tried Wrath of the Fire God? Anyone here?
No,
I heard you talk about it. I am interested.
If you ever see it for under $10 or on sale, pick it up. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Gary, what's your thoughts after seeing this? First of all, did you know about this at all before, or did this one kind of catch you by surprise?
It did actually, because sometimes it's weird, isn't it? How we get all these trailers that are released all the time, and sometimes you just don't pay attention to it. But this one does look pretty good. I've seen this latest trailer, and it looks interesting. I think games like this really live and die by the physics of how it feels to fire the bows and go through the levels. And the point that you were making, Epyx, about this being like a narrative experience sort of appeals to me as well. So I don't know too much else about it. The developer's called Odd Meter, so just get that out there. But it's one I'll keep my eye on, definitely.
Chris, I was interested in asking you, from a developer standpoint, a trailer is super important, I'd have to imagine, because it's the front-facing thing that gets out there. That's how most people discover your game, is a trailer. And one thing I've noticed in VR gaming, it's weird because a lot of times, this doesn't make any sense, but like certain trailers will make a VR game look way the hell better than that VR game ever is going to be, and it'll give you this false impression. But on the flip side, there's other trailers that you might show somebody a trailer and they're like, oh, that doesn't look that great. But then you tell them, but dude, if you saw this in a VR head, like when you get the VR headset on and it's all around you, it really does look good. I don't know how this works. How are there trailers that make games look way better, and then there's trailers that make games look way worse than they really are? As a developer, I mean, your guys' trailer came out pretty good, and you actually had a someone from the VR community starring in the trailer as well, so that was cool.
Yeah, how does it happen? I don't know. I do know that it's being in VR is just different to looking at it on a flat screen, and like what makes that difference is really difficult to pin down. I know that for our game, getting a screenshot that looks good is basically impossible. Even though I think the game looks lovely, it's really nice when you're in it. It's just great. But the moment you press like print screen and you look at it, you're like, what is this game? Rubbish. Who would want to look at this? At least one where you're trying to capture the action. Obviously it looks great, but trying to show what the game is, and it's just so hard.
I think that's a battle we've had with VR in general, guys, is just trying to get people who've never seen VR, like explaining your game to somebody who's never tried VR. They just don't get it until they try it. It's just, there's no amount of marketing, no trailers, no print screens, nothing, no concept art that can relay what putting that HMD on your head can do.
Definitely. And I think, at least in our case, that was why it was really important for us to have the mixed reality and show someone playing the game, is because it's so hard
smart.
to look at a 2D picture and feel what it feels like in VR. To show someone, like, obviously you never get that view of yourself in VR, but to show what it feels like for a person to play this game is like, you're getting a little bit there. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Anthony. Some games you look at the trailer and you're like, that looks so good, I can't wait, and you play it and you're like, oh well, thanks. And other games you look at it and you're like, oh well, that doesn't look great, but it's been recommended, and then you've lost 20 hours.
It makes you.
Yeah, I have no idea what I toss it. Sorry, I need to go.
No, it makes you really skeptical, doesn't it? Whenever you see these trailers, like this one, Sacralith, it does make you a little bit skeptical of it. And I'd much rather see some kind of. And it's got gameplay in there. I'm not saying that it's not, but it's very sort of cinematic. And you know it's not going to be like that in VR because it's not possible to do it in that same way, I suppose. But so you have to sort of all these trailers that come out when you've been in VR for a couple of years now, as we all have, and you start to look at these through a slightly different lens, you understand that they're not always going to be like that.
Yeah.
See, I'm old enough to always remember that infamous Atari 2600 game E.T. You guys, anybody know about that, right? Yeah. And that commercial, they made it sound in the trailer like you were basically in the movie with E.T. No.
But it's
I remember Pac-Man on the Atari 2600.
Oh,
when that came out, it was like Flicker City, man. It was constant flicker.
And yet I played that dozens of hours, but it was so bad. Yeah. And Donkey Kong looked like a gingerbread man. It was just, it was bad. Yeah.
But it's like all the cover art as well on all the games. I mean, when I was a kid, I bought a game on the cover art. I thought that looks absolutely awesome.
Defender? Oh, it was amazing, right? Spaceships and
Alrighty, guys. Well, basically, that's going to go ahead and wrap it up, I guess, for episode 82 of VR Roundtable. Of course, we would like to extend our thanks to Chris from Vitae Backroom joining us for this episode. We really appreciate that. We also want to thank Epyx joining us as well, and it sounds like he might come back for a weekly VR wrap-up show. That sounds awesome, and definitely be sure to check the description of our video so you can maybe go check out his history channel and give him a check over there. As always, we always ask if you guys could leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the video. And of course, for the iTunes podcast, we really love iTunes reviews. We should probably read a few reviews every once in a while. Something I forgot about. But
I think
yeah,
that'd be awesome. Yeah, you guys should.
Yeah, because then it gives people an incentive. Hey, maybe they'll mention me, you know. But basically, that's going to do it, guys. Any last comments or anything else we need to fit in here?
I just want to thank you, Chris. It was neat to hear your side of it from a developer's point, and I'd love to hear back from you. You know, a few weeks from now, months from now, and just see how things are going and how it went with the game.
And actually, just on that point as well. Sorry, Chris. Before we finish off. If you can let us know, you know, your next projects as well, with things that you're going to be working on after Paper Valley. I know it's probably, you don't want to talk about anything like that yet. You want to get Paper Valley out and sort of enjoy what you've got from that. But yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I would love to come back. Like I was saying before the show started, this is my first time ever doing a YouTube, and it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, I'd love to come back and give you my opinions on some other stuff.
Excellent. Yeah.
You did a great job. Don't worry about it.
Oh, thank you.
All righty, folks. Well, that's pretty much going to do it. So we'll see everybody next week. Take it easy.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.